Okay, so we want to start with the SBA groups. We want to organize ourselves into SBA groups. We've done that already. Everybody has their group. We went through the groups and we identified that you can take last year's SBA and modify the problem definition and even use the code, some of the code from it. You might have to modify or improve upon the code that you wrote last year to suit what you are required to do this year, right? So if you did a good job, and I think that enough of us did good jobs and we're scattered among the groups, the groups for this year's SB equally enough that everybody can, everybody can take an SB and from last year and modify it to do this year's own. All right. The only thing that I ask is that no two groups use the same SB. So if it is that you ended up doing some group work last year to produce your SB, then this year I don't want the same two groups using it as the basis of their project. All right. So for this SB, I want you to expand on your problem definition that you would have had from last year. You want to identify the business or the organization and give information on the business's background or history or how the business was developed, what the business does currently. You want to provide a general description of the problem that they are facing, a general description of the effects of the problem. So how is it or why is it that these people find themselves affected by this particular problem and what they hope to have done, okay, to have done, sorry. So what they're hoping could be done to essentially alleviate the issue. So for example, and as I said before, let's take for example, in terms of a business, let's say we have a gentleman named Mr. Charles, right? And he runs a barbershop named Charlo Barbershop. So you could start off by saying Charlo's Barbershop has been operating in Couva for the last 15 years. Charlo Barbershop is fairly popular within the community, especially because Mr. Charlo has a history of allowing for school children to only pay $10 to get their hair cut. You could identify that the barbershop, as a result, the barbershop is popular, and you would normally have a lot of people waiting in the barbershop and talking and having fun while they're waiting to get their hair cut. The issue arose, when the pandemic hit, and of course, Mr. Charlo's Barbershop could no longer be a social meeting place. And as a result, Mr. Charlo had to move to a system where he had to do appointments. But persons would not have come to the barbershop to set an appointment to come back another day. And if multiple people come to the barbershop at the same time, Mr. Charlo cannot allow all of them in to sit and wait due to the restrictions from social distancing, etc. So what Mr. Charlo tried to do was he tried to set up a WhatsApp group, but he was unable to keep track of the times that persons would make for appointments efficiently by just using the WhatsApp group. So what happened was that, there were incidents where multiple persons still ended up coming at the same time. You could highlight probably a time that a police officer passed while there was a misunderstanding about the appointment times, and Mr. Charlo got a stern warning from the officer, and he doesn't want that to happen again. So you provide like that nice background and the cause and effect of the problems. Okay? We haven't started investigating the problem yet. This is just cause and effect. This is what is causing the problem. This is what is happening because of the problem, and it's all at a very wide level. Okay? Mr. Charlo wishes to have a computer program that he can put on his laptop, which he keeps in the barber shop, to be able to record appointments immediately, see appointment times, and also keep track of persons who have kept their appointments and how much they paid, so that at the end of the month he can see the amount of money that he collected from haircuts as well. So Mr. Charlo has two issues that he's looking at. He wants an appointment management system, and Mr. Charlo also wants a bit of a basic finance tracking, so that when persons pay him, he could record it on the system. We are not going into details of how the system works at this point, right? We haven't learned the techniques that will put us there. What we're doing at this point is that we're just taking that broad view of the problem definition, right? The immediate things that like site problems that Mr. Charlo could, anybody watching Mr. Charlo's store could identify and say, well, these are the issues. All right. Okay. So, right. So we move forward. We want to start getting to the cause of or the root of the issue now. So in our groups, we want to now start to document the investigative techniques that take place. So as a group, you had to agree on your problem definition section. Whether it is you took a look at the old one or you created a new one. And from that problem, you're now saying, okay, the investigations that I am doing to get to the root causes of the problems and to gain a full understanding of why the problems that exist are the ones that exist and what could be done about them, is that we have to develop a questionnaire, we have to interview Mr. Charlo, and we have to do some observations on the business. So developing the questionnaire is we have about 10 to 12 questions, and we develop a questionnaire geared towards either the employees of the organization or the clients of the organization, or both, depending on your project. In this instance, the questionnaire has to be geared towards the clients, because the only employee is Mr. Charlo. If it is, say, for instance, that you were developing a system to record, let's say, Skybox delivery orders, you would do a questionnaire for both the customers and for the employees, because now you want to understand how the employees will interact with that system, and you want to understand how the customers will also interact with that system. For the purpose of Mr. Charlo, you're conducting a questionnaire, you're giving out questionnaires to people. So he could send out the questionnaire via his WhatsApp, right? And he could ask them 7 to 12 questions. In Mr. Charlo's case, it don't make sense asking no demographic questions, because the demographic questions for Mr. Charlo, he knows his demographic. Most of his customers are probably going to be male that are, school age or just a little older, because that is what Mr. Charlo is known for. The questions that Mr. Charlo would want to ask, or let me put it this way, the question that the analyst who is in charge of setting up the system for Mr. Charlo is going to ask he's going to ask questions like, okay, do you feel comfortable with utilizing an appointment system? Okay, you're going to ask questions that going to say, all right, do you prefer to fill out a form or to message Mr. Charlo directly when making an appointment? You have to ask questions related to the system because you have to understand, well, what would be the best way for Mr. Charlo's clients to to interact with the system. Would you like a receipt, or do you expect a receipt when you have a when you take a haircut from Mr. Charlo? Some people might like the receipt, some people mightn't for the haircut. That's not something that barbers typically do. Barbers typically don't give receipts. But if you put in this new system, maybe he wants to do that, right? So you think about questions related to the system and how they will get him to use it. Okay. Then you go on to the interview questions, and in this case, because this is a slightly weakish example for the user side, right? And we're not really focusing on like a web interface or something. So even though Mr. Charlo could have them fill out some web forms if they want an appointment, and then run an application, a C application that would read the data collected on the web form and populate the appointments. Okay. Once we have that file, once we have that information there, right, we can then ask Mr. Charlo some interview questions. What does he want from the system? And our interview questions are geared towards Mr. Charlo based upon the two requirements that he identified, really. Or these are to get the requirements. What do you want? So one of the questions towards Mr. Charlo should be, what do you want this system to do? And we are writing a report based on his answers. And maybe I did not say that for the questionnaire as well. We are writing a report for the questionnaires answers. Are you all with me? Are you with me, folks? Yes, good.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So we are taking the answers from the questionnaire. We're taking the answers from the interview, and we are discussing what was spoken about. So when you do up your questionnaire questions, and when you do up your interview questions, those go in the appendix of your SBA. But you also are supposed to have the answers to those questions. And you are creating a report based on the answers to those questions. So that you now say, well, Mr. Charlo reported that he wishes to have a system implemented. Mr. Charlo reported that he wishes to have a system implemented that would allow for his clients to book an appointment online, and he can run a program and see when the appointments for the day is going to be. Or if somebody calls him, they can call and he can see his appointments and put it in to the system for them, saying, well, what time it is. The appointments should also say what they want to do, and he could set a price then. Or who it is, he could set a price then, because he wants to keep on his lower price for children. And if, depending on your hairstyle, and if you want a fancy cut or a basic cut, he might charge them so. And then he wants that system at the end of the month to also take a look at he wants that system at the end of the month to take a look at all of the transactions for the past month and provide a report of income. Okay, to tell him how much money he wants. How much money he earned over the past month. And so this is what you're asking Mr. Charlo questions about that. All right, so those are those interview questions. In the case of Mr. Charlo's system, you might just ask about 4 or 5 questions, because you could get a a good picture of what he wants based on that. You're also doing an observation report, which means that you are supposed to be reporting as if you have gone into Mr. Charlo's business and you are recording what you see based upon how he currently runs operations. So you are telling Mr. Charlo, okay, Mr. Charlo, you have hired us to analyze your business. We are going to observe how your business runs to get an understanding of how to build this new system by observing the current system and identifying what works in it and what does not work in it. So if it is that you notice that Mr. Charlo has a good system, he currently uses a book, but sometimes he doesn't record everybody when he is finished cutting their hair, then you have to identify that. If it is that somebody shows up and Mr. Charlo has an appointment and this person shows up and the person with the appointment seems to not be there and Mr. Charlo takes them, right? Then Mr. Charlo, you record that. And then the person for the appointment shows up and you see how Mr. Charlo deals with that. And if somebody gets put off, you record that. And you record and highlight those and you identify and say, well, this is what should be done and this is what should not be done based upon what we have seen. Understood? Understood? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, good. So this is what I would like for us to do right now. I'm going to break us up into groups for the rest of the class. We have about half hour to 40 minutes. I'm going to stop the recording here. Everybody satisfied with what was spoken about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.